am Bruce Shapiro. I'm the Executive Director of the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, which, for those of you who are new to us, is a project of Columbia Journalism School devoted to improving reporting on violence, conflict, and tragedy all over the world. We are clearly gathered at an eventful moment for those issues, when the sweep of public events and the sweep of public debate are very absorbed with those issues, and we may talk about that. Before I do, though, and before we honor our winners, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague Sheila Coronel, who's the Dean of Academic Affairs here at Columbia Journalism School, and is speaking both for herself and Dean Steve Call, who had to be out of town. Sheila has been a Dart Awards judge, so she knows whereof she speaks. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I am very pleased to be here. And our Dean, Steve Cole, sends his regrets that he cannot be here to honor tonight's awardees. First of all, my gratitude to Ken Dart and the Dart family for their continued support of the Dart Center. As Bruce said, I was a judge in one of the Dart Awards a few years ago, and I've had the time to read through this year's winners, and let me say, each time I look through those winners, I am impressed by the caliber of the work, the excellence of the reporting, and Dart's early, early warning about the best out there, because as you know, one of the Dart winners today was also the recipient of the Pulitzer Awards. You told the Pulitzers which direction they should be looking at. Let me say, there has never been a more opportune time for identifying the best practices in trauma reporting. As you know, recent news events only showed us why this is essential. The recent riots in Baltimore, and before that in Ferguson, the horrible, devastating earthquake in Nepal, the new kinds of conflicts and wars erupting all around us, ISIS being only the most recent example, the new types of conflict that will continue to bewilder us in the coming years, conflicts that are borderless, fragmented, involve not the usual regular armies, but militias and other kinds of actors whose shape and form we're just beginning to see. A few weeks ago, Dean Cole, myself, and one of our former students worked on a report on the Rolling Stones' story on campus sexual assault. It was a report in which we tapped the expertise of the Dart Center, some of its professors, especially Ilana Newman, who was on the Dart. She's a Dart
research director.
She's the Dart's research director, so we her expertise on covering and reporting on victims of sexual assault on campuses. We also drew on the expertise of Christine Lombardi, who was a Dart winner and a Dart Awkward Fellow. When we were looking at that story, what we wanted to do was not just to highlight the failures, which were many, and I'm sure you're familiar with those failures, but we also wanted to draw a map going forward. How do journalists report sensitively, but also accurately on an important issue like campus rape? Christine Lombardi showed us how to go forward on that, how you can both be sensitive to the trauma that victims of college rape have experienced, while also corroborating and verifying their stories. So we draw from the experience, the expertise that the Dart Center and its awardees and its fellows have done over the years. We are heartened to know that you can be both empathetic and do good journalism. You can honor the demands of journalism as a discipline of verification, while also recognizing the horrors and sufferings that people have lived through, people who have experienced trauma, have lived through. The Dart Center has been an important convener of some of the most important conversations going on at the journalism school, whether it's a conversation on how to protect freelancers in war zones, or a conversation on Ebola and how to report on a new epidemic like Ebola, or whether it's reporting on conflict in the more traditional conflict areas. The Dart Center has provided inputs in our courses in ethics, in conflict reporting, and even science reporting. Journalism as a whole, and certainly our school, is richer for hosting the Dart Center here, and we're very pleased to be also honoring the best work being done out there on important issues related to trauma. So thank you very much again for being here with us tonight, and congratulations to all the winners of the 2015 Dart Awards.
Thank you, Sheila. Sheila now has to dash off to her investigative journalism class, so she can't stay around. But as I say, she's been a Dart Award judge, so she's already paid her dues. It's all right. She gets a all pass on this one. Sheila said some of the things that are certainly on my mind and on all of our minds tonight. We have actually among the honorees tonight are some reporters from the Baltimore Sun, who took the time to come up from a city in turmoil. We are grateful for that. Among the honorees tonight are folks from Charleston, who have themselves been in a roiling series of debates on the same issue of police violence. There are Dart Center fellows not in this room tonight who are at work in Nepal. There are Dart Center Asia Pacific fellows who are in fact Nepalese journalists, now homeless but working out of their TV stations, covering the destruction of Kathmandu and the towns around it. We have other Dart Center fellows and award winners in the Mideast, risking everything in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. And others who are in places like Everett, Washington, covering a year and more later the aftermath of one of the worst natural disasters in recent years, the Aso mudslide. Where there is suffering, where there are stories to be told, not just about violence as it happens, but of its aftermath, accumulating slowly over years in the lives of individuals and families and communities. Dart is there. The Dart Center is there. Our fellows, our award winners, the journalists we train around the world. This is, tonight, we're here for our most festive and in some ways exciting night of the year, and one of certainly our proudest achievements as the Dart Center, the Dart Awards for excellence in coverage of trauma. In a world of finger pointing and media sensationalism, we every year recognize the people who do it right, as Sheila said. And then with them, this evening, and sometimes in interviews, tip sheets, and otherwise, we try to get under the hood of their stories and figure out how journalists who are covering violence and tragedy and their aftermath can get it right and then pass it on to other journalists. As they say, in medical school, see one, do one, teach one. That is very much our motto here. You'll meet the winners in a few minutes, but before we do, first of all, I want to turn the microphone over to Ken Dart. Not to Ken Dart, I'm sorry. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jim Lammers, who represents Ken Dart. And I want to say, while Jim comes up, I want to acknowledge several people here. Jim is the president of Dart Container Corporation, and he has been a great friend and champion of Dart Center. Also here is Chris Duggan from Dart Realty, who is a key leader and advisor as we're moving ahead with planning some training in the Caribbean for journalists in the Caribbean region who deal with hurricanes, with earthquakes, with family violence and crime, the full range of social issues. And with us here also is Claudia Reminar from the Dart Foundation. She's been the was the Dart Center's program officer for many years, and she is retiring this year. So I especially want to thank Claudia for many, many years of support. And in particular, I want to acknowledge Ken Dart and the Dart family. We are in the second year of a very generous gift from Ken Dart. We are in the now 16th year of ongoing support from the Dart family in various forms. And with a thank you for that, I want to turn it over to Jim Lammers for a couple minutes.
Good evening, everybody. Just a couple quick comments. I've known Bruce for a long time now. One of the inaugural Dart Awards, which was given at Michigan State University. The Dart Center had several homes prior to landing here at Columbia, and what a home Columbia has been. A great place to be, and I can't imagine a better place for the Dart Center to be at. I've come to most of the Dart Awards over the years, and it's always been a great evening for me. It is alternately depressing because of the subject matter in terms of a lot of the reporting. And I don't think the Dart Center will be in a position to sunset at any time in our lifetimes, ever. But it's also, just to echo what Sheila and Bruce said, it's really amazing the level of excellence that we've seen over the years in terms of the nominated pieces, the honorable mentions, and the award winners. And I just want to personally say hats off to the winners tonight. I've already had the opportunity to meet some of you and have some good discussions, and look forward to more later in the evening. But to do that kind of extraordinarily good work does matter in every profession, in every walk of life. And I congratulate you for a job exceedingly well done. And with that, I will turn it back over to Bruce.
So, you know, there are a lot of ways to introduce these awards, and they're all, each individually, quite powerful. And you know, we talk about suffering, we talk about violence and tragedy, but I want to suggest something about all these winners before I introduce them all to you. First of all, and this is a big part of why we do this work at the Dart Center, all of the winners tonight whom you will meet are all doing the work of democracy. They're not just telling stories of sensational violence and sensational loss and heart-wrenching grief. They're doing it because the most important decisions that this society and any society faces have to do with violence and have to do with its aftermath. How do we protect school children from a mass shooting? How do we deal with the challenges of urban violence? What do we do in the face of natural disaster? Do we go to war or not? How we understand those issues as a country, as a culture, as a people, really is at the heart of the the job of journalism. And that really is the work that all four of the winning teams do tonight. Let me just give you a little background on the Dart Award. As Jim said, this award actually now has been given for 21 years, beginning at MSU, Michigan State University. It was the first project, first collaboration of the Dart family, the Dart Foundation, and the group of clinicians and journalists and educators who eventually, in 1999, gelled into the Dart Center. There was a Dart Award before there was a Dart Center. From the beginning, a few things have been part of the criteria. Every Dart Award winner, and by the way, there were dozens of entries this year, of which this year's winners were chosen. Every Dart Award winner must demonstrate journalistic excellence at the highest level. This is exemplary journalism. Good intentions don't count. It has to be great journalism. Secondly, it has to demonstrate the core compassion and values of understanding and contribute to public understanding of trauma in one way or another. All of those values are represented tonight. The Dart Awards are also a team prize. So there are actually quite a few winners on hand. We make it a team prize because it's always been our contention that for news organizations to do extraordinary work around an issue as challenging, often involving issues that the public doesn't think it wants to know about, that we naturally avert our eyes from, takes a commitment by an entire newsroom. So whether the writers, photographers are freelancers or not, it doesn't matter. It takes a special contribution by a publication, a newspaper, a magazine, a website. This is also now a cross-media award. We started out as a daily newspaper prize. With the change in the media landscape, we tried creating a broadcast award, but then we realized it was time to blow those categories up. And interestingly, tonight we have all kinds of platforms represented in this small group of 4 winners. A few other points of continuity and innovation that I just want to point out before I actually do the awards. First of all, it's worth noting that, as I said earlier, 2 of our winners tonight, folks from Charleston and folks from Baltimore, are at the epicenter of the ongoing public debate about police violence, the response to it, and the issues underlying it. That's, even though that's not the subject at hand. Secondly, and this is important, 2 of the winning teams include past Dart Center Ockberg Fellows, people who've been part of a 1-week seminar here. We didn't plan it this way. I do not help choose the winners, but I do think it's a tribute to the commitments of the individual winners over a long period of time. One of them, Dave Wood, was one of our very first fellows back in 2002, 2001, pre-9/11. And another, Melissa de Bosque, was a fellow just 2 years ago. So we're proud to be part of a conversation going on within journalism about how to do these stories better. There are also, of the 4 winners tonight, two represent partnerships with nonprofit investigative projects, or partnerships between news organizations. Both the Texas Observer Guardian team that you'll be introduced to was a partnership in and of itself. B was a partnership with the Nation Institute, which funds nonprofit, which funds investigative projects around the country and sometimes around the world. And the folks in Charleston, Post and Courier, were partners with the Center for Investigative Reporting. This is a big innovation in journalism. It's the way things are going, and it's good. It's all for the good. All the stories tonight, and I think this is the most significant point of continuity, all 4 of the packages of stories we'll honor tonight involve crucial issues that were hiding in plain sight. None of tonight's winners involve the Freedom of Information Act extracting stuff that was kept secret by the CIA. None of it involves, mafia or the kinds of things in a direct way, things that are kept secret and then ripped out into the sunlight in the proud tradition of investigative reporting. Instead, these are stories about issues that have been out there but unexamined. What happens to soldiers in the aftermath of the difficult choices they face in battle? Who is counting the deaths of abused women? What happens in one postage stamp of soil in Texas that is consumed with the often fatal consequences of our immigration policy? What happens in the lives of children and families in Baltimore in the aftermath of exposure to violence both within and outside of the home? These issues are here waiting to be examined, and yet journalism has neglected them. Each of these stories is pioneering because they're using the tools of investigative reporting, the tools of data reporting, the tools of trauma reporting to cast a spotlight on issues that everyone knows is there, yet nobody has cared to ask about until now. So that's the landscape that we'll be exploring tonight. I'm going to start, first of all, with the honorable mention for this year. The judges, by the way, this year had a very hard time. There were, at the very top tier of the 15 or so finalists, extraordinary works of journalism, and choosing winners among them was very challenging, and the judges called me up. I was out with the flu in bed. The judges called me up and said, "Can we please do 3 awards instead of 2? And can we do 3 plus an honorable mention?" Okay, so we did. First of all, the honorable mention goes to the Baltimore Sun. Baltimore Sun received an honorable mention for Collateral Damage. This illuminating 3-part series explores the consequences of violence on children, caregivers, educators, and others not directly in the line of fire, drawing on new scientific research and interviews with educators, community advocates, and survivors of violence. Collateral Damage demonstrates the far-reaching ripple effects of violence on one urban community. Our judges call this series eye-opening, compelling, and it is. I'd like to ask Claudia to come up to help do some award handing out. And I'd like to ask Andrea McDaniels, the health and medicine reporter from the Baltimore Sun, to come up and receive this award. On behalf of her team, who are not here, but who include Lloyd Fox, the photographer, Diana Sugg, the project editor, Dave Rosenthal, the senior editor for investigations and enterprises. Andrea and team, congratulations.
A bunch of us were joking that we're print reporters. We're not supposed to be behind a microphone, but I'm going to attempt to do this. I'm grateful for this award, particularly given all the the good work that my colleagues around the country have done. It's an honor to be included with that. I was lucky that I had supportive editors who saw this idea that I had and saw that I could do more with it. Also, I was also a fellow with the USC Health Journalism program, and they were also very supportive. This idea grew out of a little nugget, health reports that said violence was a disparity, and I just kept digging in deeper and deeper, and the more that I looked into it, the more I realized that there were so many families being affected, and I just, it saddened me, but also made me want to look more and more into the stories, about what was happening to these families, and I thought it was important, that people know this because violence happens all the time. We write about violence in the Sun all the time, but we never write about what happens to the regular people in Baltimore. So I thought it was important, to get that out. And as I was doing the stories, I also thought it was really, really important to write about them not just as victims, but write about them as, full people. Because in every story, no story is black and white, there's nuance in everything. And these are families that also, although they're suffering, they also love their children. They also want their children to do well. They also want their neighborhoods to do well. So it was very important for me to try to paint that picture, hopefully I did. And my only hope is that by getting these stories out, that it brings attention, and something's done about it. And as you all know, there's a lot going on in Baltimore right now, so my story is not done, and I plan to write more and more about this issue, and hope to bring more attention.
And we'll hear much more from Andrea when we do our panel in a few minutes exploring these issues in some depth. First DART award of the evening goes to the Huffington Post, the team of David Wood, who is here, and John Montorio, who is also here, for the 3-part series Moral Injury. This provocative 3-part series examines the concept of moral injury, where combat and operational experiences transgress deeply held moral and ethical beliefs that undergird a service member's sense of humanity. A damage to the soul, some would say. This is a deep, intimate portrayal of soldiers' moral struggles and delivers with enormous understanding new scientific concepts that stretch and even go beyond our notions of post-traumatic stress disorder. Introducing this idea, which is very much the heart of a lot of scientific debate now, to the general public. It was a pioneering series in that way. The judges praised Moral Injury for gracefully and confidently marrying the humanity and understanding of its survivors with a gritty, powerful investigation that breaks new ground. They call Dave Wood's writing incredibly powerful, thoughtful, compelling, and artful, which we knew, those of us who know him, and praise him for delving deeply into complex new territory. They call the video elements powerful and illuminating. Dave Wood and John Montorio, come on up. One of you, both of you? 2 minutes?
So as Bruce mentioned, my connection with the DART Foundation and Center goes back to 2001. Since when I was a fellow, since then I have come to really admire the work that they do. It is absolutely stunning and so badly needed in all kinds of ways. And I won't go into all of it, but one thing I just want to briefly mention, and that is that the DART Center sponsored a gathering of war correspondents to talk about what we went through and to try to get our editors up to speed on the kinds of things we needed when we came back from the war zone. So that was really a great piece of work. So it was 14 years ago that I was a DART fellow, and ever since then I've been trying to win this prize.
As usual, I find it difficult to improve on David's words.
But go ahead and try.
But I wanted to say that this idea came across a table of martinis and steak. We are old-line journalists. This is not new media. This is the way old media created story ideas. So after the third martini, this idea sounded very good. And then it turned out to be very good. And I want to say that it was Dave's passion and his persistence and his vision that created this three-part series. And I just tried to stay out of the way and guide him when I could, but Dave is a pro. Dave deserves the lion's share of this award, and I really appreciate this being recognized, the power of this piece being recognized by Columbia Journal and by the DART Center. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
And again, we'll hear more about this in a few minutes. Next, the Post and Courier, recipients of the Pulitzer Prize, but we got them first, received the DART Award for the 5-part series, Till Death Do Us Part. This comprehensive 5-part print and multimedia investigation exposes South Carolina as a state where more than 300 women died from domestic violence over the last decade, while political leaders did little to stem the violence. The series reveals numerous failings, including limited police training, inadequate laws, a lack of punishment, insufficient education for judges, a dearth of victim support, and traditional beliefs about the sanctity of marriage that keep victims locked in a cycle of abuse. The series evoked a strong response from state political leaders vowing reforms, and it also portrayed not only women who died, but survivors of domestic violence with enormous dignity and vivid grace. We're going to play a little video clip from this multimedia package.
He was Mr. Charm at first, and then he turned out to be Mr. Harm.
Everyone in the community loved him. He had so many friends. He could have had it all. But he chose, by virtue of his own actions, to throw it all away.
He told me that he loved them and, he would never do anything to hurt them.
Everybody saw Dr. Jekyll. I was the only one that saw Mr. Hyde.
And then a month later, everything started changing.
There were nightly fights, physical, emotional abuse was always in the house.
And I can kind of still can really hear it to this day. I can like remember the scream.
To have to go in there and close out 5 of those caskets, it was just, I just knew that there was no way that this is supposed to happen.
And I didn't even realize then that he was like really stabbing her. I just got seeing blood.
Very, very violent, very, very loud, very, very physical.
I was continuously assaulted at least 3 times a night. I was being raped.
And he said, I grabbed her by the neck and I twisted.
I turned up and looked up and I was in shock. I was like, a gun. And the last words he said to me was, if I can't have you, nobody can. And he pulled the trigger and my head exploded.
The judges, this year's Dart Award judges called Till Death Do Us Part extraordinarily powerful, so thoroughly reported and well-written as to feel like the definitive work on domestic violence in South Carolina. They praised the series for deep cultural analysis, for laying bare the roots of domestic violence, from religion to Southern culture to political inaction to legal leniency. And the judges also commended the series for breaking new ground by exploring the myriad forces that contribute to the problem of domestic violence, creating rich and insightful portraits of victims and survivors. The team members include Glenn Smith, Watchdog Public Service Editor, and Jennifer Hawes, Projects Reporter, who are in attendance, along with, not in attendance, Doug Pardue, Projects Reporter, Natalie Cowell-Hoff, Reporter, Grace Beam, Photojournalists, J. Emery Parker, Interactive Editor, Chris Hanklowski, Videographer, Multimedia Producer, and Maureen Hartshorn, Page Designer. Glenn and Jennifer, please come up.
Well, I just want to say first, thank you on behalf of myself and my incredibly talented colleague and editor, Glenn Smith, and all the other people on this team, Doug, Natalie, and lots of people who took part in this project. But this video really reminds me of what I really hope is that this pays some credit to the victims who we were able to talk with. We really had a project that, as Bruce said, was just in plain sight. This was something that had been going on and on and on in our community and our state forever. And we also had not covered it. And so I think that what made this possible more than anything else, more than any ranking or statistic, were the many, many victims and their families who shared their stories with us, who shared very personal stories, who entrusted us with the details of what had happened to them. And ultimately, we're strangers to these victims, and I guess I'm just so honored that they shared these stories with us so that we could then go out and try to affect some change in the community. And the degree to which that happens, we'll see. Our legislature is wrestling with this as we speak, so hopefully this will help to keep the pressure on them to make those changes as well. So I would just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us on the team, but also on behalf of the victims, who really are the ones that make these stories compelling, make us able to go out and really raise awareness of this incredible problem. So thank you, appreciate it.
I reiterate what Jennifer said. We're very honored and humbled to receive this award, and as nice as it is to get this recognition and to see some reform efforts underway, it's also a little sobering to understand that since we ran this series, 30 more people have died in our state. Thank you very much.
You know, I have to say, I've been looking at reporting on domestic violence, on intimate partner violence for many years. This is an extraordinarily innovative project. No one has ever tried to do it before. And you guys are having an impact not only in South Carolina, but around the country. And I think you'll be inspiring other journalists who will follow your path. So thank you. The next and final DART Award presentation is going to the Texas Observer and the Guardian. Their collaboration, receiving the DART Award for the 4-part multimedia series Beyond the Border. This wide-ranging 4-part investigative print and multimedia series examines the impact that the current immigration crisis has on those immediately affected in one, and we'll talk about this later, in one particular county, in one particular region of Texas, portraying various players who are often pitched against one another: the migrant and her family, a rancher whose land is used and abused by smugglers, the sheriff of a border town who's had an international humanitarian crisis on his town, and the Guatemalan council who tries to help stranded migrants from all countries, not just her own. These complex and humane portraits create a strong, haunting sense of the community that is formed in Brooks County, Texas, in the face of overwhelming numbers of people risking their lives and sometimes giving their lives to escape violence in their homelands. Again, we have a video clip that will give you some flavor of this extraordinary and equally innovative series.
This is the perfect storm. Every person has a story as to why they're coming across.
Primeramente Dios, yo la voy a recuperar.
We're fighting a war here.
Every day somebody's dying here. You have to always think that it will get better.
From every indicator we have, this is going to get worse.
So our judges called Beyond the Border a masterfully executed series that takes an abstract issue like immigration policy and makes it real, portraying each character as the complicated individuals that they are, not just the roles that they occupy in this epic drama. Judges praised the series for offering a sensitive but not mawkish look at the horrific reality unfolding and for its holistic examination of a crisis. They called Melissa Del Bosque's prose eloquent and gripping, and the care of detail in the narrative and visual components wonderfully compelling, and they praised the multimedia elements, calling them powerful, enriching, and unforgettable. The team members, we have a whole passel of these team members here, and all these really do exemplify the fact that it takes a team to do this work. I'm going to read all of your names because there's so many of you in attendance it doesn't matter. From the Texas Observer, Melissa Del Bosque, investigative reporter; Eugenio Del Bosque Gomez, photographer; David Mann, senior editor; Jan Reel, multimedia editor; Brad Tyler, managing editor. From the Guardian US, Fielding Cage, interactive editor; Keenan Davis, interactive journalist; Rich Harris, interactive journalist; Alex Kompelman, U.S. News editor; Nadja Popovich, interactive journalist; Kenton Powell, interactive journalist; May Ryan, video journalist. Those of you who are here, come up, and you can't all speak, but one each from the Observer and Guardian. Who knows how to do this? All right. Who wants an award? Never has the team prize part of the DART Award been better exemplified than in this group.
Who's going to speak?
Okay, quick, just for the picture, stay in line for the picture. Okay.
We'll never get
We'll do more pictures later. Okay, thank you. Okay. Who speaks? One from each news organization, please. Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Del Bosque from the Texas Observer. I think we win the large group acceptance award here. So many people to thank. It really does take a village to do a project like this. And first of all, I want to thank the Dart Center for this award and for the invaluable training that they do for journalists. I also want to thank everybody at the Texas Observer, on our team, Jen Reel, Eugenio Del Bosque, the amazing multimedia team at The Guardian, May Ryan, Alex Koppelman. I want to thank the Investigative Fund, Nation Institute, Esther Kaplan. Thank you so much for your support of this project and over the years. I want to thank the good people of Brooks County. This is an issue that has been unfolding for many years, unfortunately, a humanitarian crisis, people dying in the ranch lands. And immigration is such a polarizing topic that I feel oftentimes the complexity of the issue isn't portrayed in the media very often. So we were really trying to get the humanity, the impact of this crisis that was unfolding in this small rural county. So I want to thank the people of Brooks County for opening their doors to us and giving us their time. And I especially want to thank Elsie Hernandez and her family for sharing their story and their grief with us and searching for her daughter, Exelina. So I want to thank her for that.
Hi, I'm May Ryan for The Guardian. I'm a video journalist. I want to thank the whole team here, and especially Melissa Del Bosque, who without her this project really could not have happened. She knew this area so intimately, and as a national news organization, it's hard for us to really get into a place and meet these people, and she really, set the stage for us to go down there, and she connected me with all of the people who are amazing subjects and let me into their lives. And, I got to eat dinner and hang out with people in a way that is unusual in a time when it's often hard to get a full 9 days to go out and report on a story. So I want to also thank The Guardian for giving me the time to do that. Thank you.
And again, we'll hear more from everyone. Those are this year's Art Award winners. We're going to take a 2-minute break. Please get another drink. And then panelists will please come up and we will actually talk about these things. A few minutes ago, we raised our glasses to these wonderful Art Award winners, the extraordinary and important work that they've done. We're now going to have a conversation about how to do it, because this award doesn't only celebrate, it's designed as well to educate and inspire, to educate and inspire other journalists to learn from these innovations and best practices, and to educate the public as well about what it takes to do this kind of journalism and what's behind stories that matter. This will be a conversation amongst these journalists and myself, and then with all of you in a few minutes. And it's being recorded on video. We're not live streaming, but we will be putting this up eventually on the Dart Center website. So this leads me to say that when we have questions and answers, A, identify yourself. B, don't say anything that you wouldn't want your grandmother or your grandchildren to hear. Okay? I'm going to start where we sort of ended, and with this notion of hiding in plain sight. And I'm going to talk in particular to Andrea and to Glenn. Andrea, you dealing with the sort of rippling effect of children exposed to violence, and Glenn with this remarkable series of stories on women who die as a result of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse, childhood violence, these are issues that people think they know. Nothing new about raising them in the day. What made you revisit these issues? Everybody thinks they know. And how did you go about getting readers to pay attention to issues that we all think we know the answers to? or at least think we know all about.
So violence is obvious in Baltimore. Everybody knows there's violence. And then we have the children, who aren't doing well in school, et cetera. Everybody knows that. So my goal was to show, why is this happening and how are the two interrelated. And I don't think it was hard to get the readers to want to know about it, once all the information was out there. The key was telling it through the eyes of people it was actually affecting. And once you tell those personal stories, I think people could relate. And I got tons of emails from people saying, wow, I never thought about it this way. But now that you say it, you would expect it to happen that way.
What was it that first triggered you to take that extra step, to go beyond the boundaries of what these kind of stories usually do?
It was basic beat reporting. Every year the health department puts out a health disparity report. And every year violence is listed as the top 5. So my question was, how is violence impacting people's health? We know that people die from violence, that's obvious, but how is it affecting, aspects of health that we don't think about? And as, I talked to mental health specialists, I talked to health department officials, it came out that there's suffering of all kinds that we don't think about every day. And it actually has a bigger impact than the people who just die. Not that people dying is not important, obviously, but there's a larger impact, that we don't think about every day.
What?
I can tell you exactly. The fall of 2013, the Violence Policy Center in Washington, D.C. puts out a report every year that ranks states by how deadly they are for women at the hands of men. And we were ranked #1 in the nation for our murder rate for women. And we looked back and we had been in the top 10 for at least 15 years, for as long as they kept records, and been #1 3 times. And nobody had really done much about that. We hadn't done much about that. I called into a conference call set up by the State Domestic Violence Coalition with a panel of experts, all these people available for you to talk to about the problem, and they invited all the media in the state. I was the only one that called up. And we waited about 20 minutes, no one else chimed in. So I talked to all these experts, learned all this stuff, and got off the phone, and we went back and we were talking to folks at the paper, and we were like, how is it that we've grown so numb to this, that this isn't shocking, that we're the #1 in the nation, and have been for so many years? Why don't we know more? So we decided to put a team together and try to get beyond that real surface reporting of everybody saying, oh, this is terrible, and then you move on to the next story.
Dave, Melissa, May, what were the triggers for you in getting into these unusual projects?
Well, so I'm a slow learner. It took, I think, 35 years for this story to germinate until John really provoked me into finally starting to do the work. But it took took 35 years for 2 reasons. One is it took me that amount of time to develop what I think is a key ingredient in writing about people who've been traumatized, and that is patience. You gotta be really patient. You have to, I think traumatized people build up, protective barriers around themselves. They don't want to be traumatized again, and a lot of them take on, this isolation. And so it takes a while to get through there, and you gotta be patient. And, I thank John and Ariana Huffington for giving me the time to be patient. So that was a key thing. And part of that is learning to listen with a sense of validation. And I just learned this doing this project, and I learned it from some very talented mental health people. Listening with validation means, in the case of a Marine that I wrote about, who shot a child in a very morally sort of ambiguous situation, as he was telling his story, I liked this guy, and I wanted to say to him, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, you couldn't help it, or it was war, bad things happen, and I kept wanting, but I had learned enough to just sit back and let him tell his story, and then to say something in a validating way, which was, can't use the word that I used, but yeah, that was screwed up. That was a bad situation. And because if what I learned is if you're listening to a traumatized person telling a story, the worst thing you could do is sort of deny the validity of their story. And it's a human impulse, but it's the wrong one. And then the other reason it took me 35 years is developing the art of storytelling, which I think, again, is so critical. And everybody up here, I'm just in awe of what everybody's done. The art of storytelling, and especially how people are starting to incorporate other forms of media other than print into their storytelling. So, sorry for that long answer. I finally got here.
Melissa May, what was the kind of the spur?
Well, this issue had been unfolding for quite some time. I think it was like the other journalists were saying, it was happening in plain sight for several years.
In Brooks County or generally?
In Brooks County, and in 2012 we surpassed Arizona as being the deadliest place for border crossers, which was quite a shock, I thought. And it was the situation though where people were kind of getting used to it, you know. I mean, they have recovered more than 300 bodies in the past 4 years in this little county, you know. So this county is dealing with this very complex situation, you know, of sort of political failure here, with our immigration system, political failure in Central America. A lot of people now are coming up from Central America, and they don't even realize they're going to have to walk for 2 days through this, you know, 3 triple-digit heat in this rugged ranch land. So, and there had been a lot of coverage, but the coverage had been, you know, 800 words. It didn't get the complexity of this really large issue. There's a militia in this county that, you know, guards their ranch land, and it would be very easy to make it into a sort of stereotypical, like, the militia, you know, are these crazy, the ranchers are a lot of them are very conservative ideologically, you know, you can make it very stereotypical if you wanted to, but what I was really interested in was much more the complexity of the human impact, and being able to collaborate with May and everybody, and maybe May, you want to say something too, really brought out the complexity, I think, and
yeah, so I learned about Brooks County from Melissa, and actually getting there was pretty amazing to see this tiny, tiny town that's really at the epicenter of this international crisis. And to see, as Melissa said, these people who've sort of become accustomed to this as everyday sort of life. And also to get past these archetypes and to get really in deep with people and understand there are ranchers who own this land, and they have migrants passing through every day, and they don't want these people to die on their property either. So it's not about black and white. There's a lot of gray areas that we wanted to investigate, and I think having the time to spend with people and really unpack that was really important.
And just to contextualize this a little bit, when we're talking about Brooks County, you describe this in a piece as a county so poor that the police can't even afford the DNA tests required by law on the hundreds of migrants who die there.
right, yeah, half of their budget goes into just recovering the bodies and burying people. So, yeah, it's completely overwhelmed their system.
I want to go back to something that Dave, you talked about, but I want to hear from the rest of you on. One of the things that marks all of these stories, all these packages, is the extraordinary trust, the extraordinary reservoirs of trust that you clearly built up with highly, not only traumatized, but deeply vulnerable sources, people with a lot to lose, undocumented migrants with a lot to lose, veterans with a lot to lose, women who've already lost a lot, people who are dealing with shame, with confusion. Dave told us a little bit about what he brought to the interviews and storytelling. How did the rest of you deal with that question of vulnerability? Maybe starting with you, because when I think of kind of multimedia, cameras, with all due applause to our photographer here, and multimedia, I think of things that intrude, that get in the way, that make trust a little more challenging, or make people into performers. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I deal with this a lot because I have 2 cameras, I have big lights, you know, it's a big production, and it immediately feels a bit less intimate. So I usually try talking with people before I set up everything and meet with them before and sort of explain what I'm doing and get a sense of who they are so that we're not meeting for the first time when I turn on the lights. And you know, sometimes once I really start going with someone, they can forget that there is this major production around them. And also, it's just a matter of spending time with people and going out into the field with them as well.
And are there particular kinds of shots, particular kinds of editing that you found yourself doing to try to convey something to these folks? Did you think about it visually?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like when I was going out with the sheriff's department, I just made sure that they knew that I was there, and whenever something was happening, that they would call me. With video, you really have to be there and see things as they're unfolding. So I developed a relationship with them and really made sure that I was there on the scene as things were happening.
What about in your series? I mean, we saw a few clips of this, and it's evident in all of the quotes throughout the series. Clearly, you did spend a lot of time, but what else went into extracting this kind of the truth of the vulnerable and the truth of the resilience from these folks?
I think when we started out, we wanted to really not just tell a story about violent acts and the aftermath of violent acts, but to explain sort of the complexity of domestic violence, and wanted to get past that initial dismissiveness I thought some of our readers might have of, oh, well, you know, she went back to him, or she's in the home, and, you know, that sort of there's some complicity there. We wanted to get at the reasons, the controlling nature of domestic violence, and in so many different ways. And these women were incredibly brave to share their stories with us, and I think we spent a great deal of time with them, trying to build up that trust, and really trying to get them to understand that we weren't interested just in the horrific acts, incidents that occurred, but really help others learn how they could avoid that sort of thing, and all of the.
How did you grapple with the question of graphic detail? How much graphic detail to ask of folks, and how much to put into the story?
I think we didn't want to just do it for shock value. Just whatever, I don't know, it's really difficult. Whatever seemed appropriate. I know we even ran some crime scene photos with the stories. One with a bloody knife on the floor. We had others that were even more graphic that we could have used, but we chose not to use them. I think we wanted to show imagery that drove the point home that this is very, very real. Not maybe just a shot of a gravestone somewhere, or a shot of someone after the fact, but very strong image, but not too strong to make it look like we're taking advantage of the situation.
And Andrea, in your story, first of all, you're writing about your own community, and secondly, you're talking to the people who nobody talks to about the impact of violence very often. How did that go?
Well, a lot of the people I ran into, first of all, have felt exploited, and we have a lot of research institutions in our town. In our town, a lot of people felt like research institutions come in, they do all the study, they ask them about their lives, and once the money runs out, they're gone. So I got a lot of that, you're gonna come in, talk to me, and then you're gonna be gone. So I had to spend a lot of time in the communities. I had to reach out to social workers who knew people in the community that could kind of bridge that gap. And, just spend a lot of time and keep reassuring them that, I don't want to exploit them, I want to tell the truth. But I also realize, some of the dangers you might face, and that, I'd be really sensitive to that. And kind of to what David was alluding to, I also wasn't afraid to show compassion for the families. I think it's important for them to see the reporter as being human too, and not just somebody on the outside, looking on and, just wanting to write about them, but to show that, you understand what they are going through. And up to the very end, there were times when, first of all, I lost a lot of families. I would meet families and to talk to them, and then, they'd open up, and then they'd disappear, and I'd have to start from scratch again. And even almost to the very end, There was a family I wrote about where the daughter saw the guy shot in the courtyard by the projects, and I wanted to come to her house and see what happened. And so I kept asking her, and then all of a sudden she stopped returning my call, she stopped returning my text. So I was like, what's going on? You know, she was so open. So I had to go to the school where she worked and ask her, what's wrong, because I could tell that something was wrong. And she didn't want me to come to the house because the killer hasn't been caught. For all she knows, he lives next door. She didn't want her, she said the neighbors are really nosy. They would know I wasn't from the neighborhood. So she was just really concerned about me coming, to her environment. So in the end, I had to reassure her that, once again, I don't want to put you in danger. So, I'm sensitive to that, and, I don't have to come to your house. I mean, I knew where she lives, I did, that background report. I don't have to come to your house. I can do about the story. Then she opened up again and let me back in. So there was a lot of, I don't want to call it negotiating, but just letting people know that you understand what they're going through.
Melissa, one of the things that I found interesting was, on the one hand, you clearly spent a lot of time with, for instance, this family that had a child who just disappears from the face of the earth. And that's one kind of interview and challenge. But you also spend a lot of time in this story with people who are often portrayed as the bad guys. How did it, with sheriffs, with immigration officials and others, how did you approach those interviews to get the kind of sort of soul exposure that really they did for you? What was that like?
Well, it was a big challenge going out with the rancher, Mr. Cage, and I really have to thank Jen Reel actually for her help, because she grew up on a farm in the Midwest, so they really bonded, the rancher and the farmer.
Why team journalism sometimes matters.
I told him I was from California, and he was not impressed. So I had nothing to tell the city slicker, but he and Jen really got along well. But what I was really interested in was what the land meant to him, and driving around his land, and he's like, this tree over here was named after my son, all these landmarks, and sort of to get past that, because he was, he's very conservative. I mean, he said, I think that Obama is letting people cross illegally so that they can help the Democrats. I mean, he believes that, but at the same time, he's a very intelligent man and really cares about his legacy and about his land and his family. So I was really interested in the complexity of his story, and to understand. I mean, that would be so weird, just having people from all over the world coming through your land all the time. At night, you don't know who they are. He's had babies born on his land. They've taken people in. They've helped people. So it was just a really fascinating. I'm just fascinated by people in general. I'm very nosy, so I like to listen.
So the moral of this story is bring along someone who grew up on a farm.
Yeah, if you're going to meet a rancher, it's important.
Let me ask something to all of you. There is now a big debate in journalism in general and investigative journalism in particular in the wake of the Rolling Stone fiasco about how to balance compassion and traditional journalism values, and in particular how to deal with verification and with transparency with often deeply traumatized and sometimes suspicious with good reason, or reluctant to trust with good reason sources, and often deeply wounded people. All of your stories pass the documentation test in every conceivable way, but in your interactions with sources and in your own kind of minds, how did you deal with that question? How much did you tell your sources you were going to have to do? How did you test your own empathy? How did these issues play out in the course of this work?
I can answer. I always say that nobody should be surprised about what they see in your story. So I'm always like 100% open about what I'm going to include, and I tell them I'm going to do background checks. I tell them I have to look into that. In the story that I did on the moms who grieve, one of the moms was like, why do you have to include that, you know, my son was involved in some criminal activity? I said, and you know, I told her like that's part of the story. I'm still a reporter and I have to be honest and tell the facts. But I also let her know at the same time, just because, you know, your son was involved in some criminal activity doesn't mean that your grief is any less, and that you can grieve too, and that he's still your son. So you just try to be straightforward with them and let them know it's going to be in the story, but also let them know that you understand, and that you'll show the nuance as well.
Yeah, I think we all, in this kind of reporting, you come to a place where you start skating into territory that's extremely sensitive, and the person starts, you could tell, starts to be thinking, you know, I'm not really sure I want this in print. And I have sometimes said, look, I'm in the business of telling stories, not in the business of ruining your life. And if printing this is going to ruin your life, then let's back off. Or let's think about a different way to tell the story. That's a really hard thing to do, because my instinct is to tell as much as I can and not to leave anything on the table. But I think sometimes you have to do that. It's a hard decision to make. I always tell people what I'm gonna, you know, that whatever they tell me, I don't take, you know, except in the most extreme circumstances, usually when I'm talking to a senior military or government person, I don't ever go on background or off the record. Everything is, to me, is on the record, and everything is usable. But as I say, sometimes you come to a point where you just think, especially, I gotta say, with young Marines who will tell you almost anything, and sometimes I just think, you know, I can't use that.
I think you live by the model, trust but verify, and I think exact same way with our sources, that you be upfront with them, you tell them, look, I want to tell your story in detail, be as compassionate as possible, but certain elements of this, and you're accusing people of doing things, and there's facts that I just need to verify, I can't put them out there. I think that establishes a little bit of trust with the person as well, that you're that thorough, and that if something came up about them, that you would explore that with them before it ends up in print. And I think overall that builds up the greater trust.
Wasn't May either one of you on this one?
I just feel an enormous responsibility, because I interview a lot of people who are undocumented, a lot of marginalized people, so I spend a lot of time with them, just, you know, showing them the publication I work for, talking to them about the story, seeing if they're comfortable with it. A lot of the people that I work with aren't, you know, they don't read, they're not accustomed to the media and how it works, and so like in the case of Elsie Hernandez, I went up a couple of times and just sat with her and her family before we even started the interviews, just to make sure that they were comfortable. Because most of the people I interview really have no reason to talk to me, you know. They don't have documents, and so, and I don't want to do anything that's going to get them in trouble, so I feel a lot of responsibility, and so we have a lot of ongoing conversations, and I'm lucky I get to work on projects over a period of time, so it's a work in progress, what they're comfortable using and not using.
If any of you have questions, why don't you come up to the mic now? Come on, it's a journalism school. Oh, you must be curious. While people figure out what they're going to ask and come up to the mic, Dave, I'm going to ask you, and this is, it's sort of for all of you, but it's particular for you. You did something very unusual. You chose to write a whole series about an idea, this idea of moral injury. And if there's one thing that kind of gets drilled into us early in our careers, it's to run away from ideas and instead tell stories about people or maybe issues, but ideas, no. A, why an idea? And B, as a strategist, as a journalist strategist, how did you think about doing this unusual thing, which is really writing a whole series around an idea?
So that comes out of my, you know, as I said, it took me 35 years to do this. I've been going to war a lot, and I knew a lot of people who've been to wars. I'd seen what that does to people, and so it wasn't that I set out to write a story about an idea. You know, but in conversations with John Montorio, my editor, the concept of writing a series about moral injury gradually emerged, and we began to see how we could do that. And it was pretty clear. I mean, you need some characters in your stories to make it go. You can't just write about, you know, sort of ideation of moral injury. So it turned out to be pretty prosaic reporting. It was the idea that took us a while to get to.
And the rest of you had kind of animating ideas beneath your stories, and also a lot of data. And actually maybe for you, something as complex as immigration, and also as heart-wrenching as some of the very specific experiences of the families, ranchers, the consul here. How did you think about making, and how did the rest of the Guardian team, for that matter, and Texas River team, think about taking data and placing it alongside these stories, making it visual, all that sort of stuff? What was the approach you used to help us see it?
Sure. So as we were down reporting is when national attention actually really shifted towards the women and children coming across. And that's not something we planned. It's just something that happened. So there was this big national debate going on, and working with the interactive team, they could really give us the full-scale context, where you could see where these people were coming from, what areas were controlled by which gangs, and things that we couldn't really share within these personal stories, we really could get at with these interactive maps and all sorts of amazing things.
And I mean, Glenn, you guys did a tremendous sort of visual and data job with this. How did you think about that?
Yeah, we spent the first few months of this actually building a database because the information really wasn't readily available. We didn't know how many women had died over how many years. And so
and that was where you got help from the Center for Investigative Reporting,
Yeah,
right?
they gave us some database training and showed us how to, sort of things to look at. And we spent a lot of time gathering data from a whole bunch of different sources, cobbling it together. And then we came up with this, boy, there's over 300 women have died. It's one every 12 days. And all these other factoid things, which were really compelling and striking statistics, but the stories needed to be fleshed out with personal stories to make them compelling and readable and all that. So, yeah, we used a lot of interactive maps and graphics and things that could tell the stories in different ways so you didn't clog the narrative with a whole bunch of factoids.
Yeah. And Andrea, how did you guys deal with this sort of stuff?
Mine wasn't so much the data, but the science.
Yeah.
So, being able to make the science easy to read and not make people's eyes glaze over. But I think the same as you said, it was kind of interchanging their personal stories with the science that people saw.
Well, and what's interesting about both you and Dave is that you both had to deal with not only explanatory science, but this kind of place where science bleeds over into the genuinely existential, the way people's lived experience collides with science. How did you think about that, sort of the explanatory?
God, I
versus
wrestled with it. The scientific part of the psychology, the whole business of psychological therapy for people with PTSD and moral injury, it was very hard for me to think about, and I had a very understanding editor who gave me a lot of time to try to figure that out. But it was really hard to weave that into a narrative in a way that I thought people wouldn't just drop off to sleep in the middle of it. So again, it's the craft of writing.
Question? Anyone? All right. Hey, a Dart Award winner gets to ask a question. This is yet another first tonight.
Not very many years ago, maybe 7 years
Into the mic,
ago.
please.
Closer to the mic. Okay.
Closer to the mic.
Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
So not many years ago, I would say it was about 2008. I get my decades mixed up. We had many conversations at the Los Angeles Times about the death of long-form journalism with the onset of the web. And it seemed like very, very dire predictions that we wouldn't be doing stories of great synthesis, analysis, or description. We wouldn't have the resources, both financial and talent-wise, to let this great group spend 6 months, 8 months, a year on a project. And so that's a long-winded way of getting to my question, which is I'd love your insights about where do you see the future of long-form journalism? Because there does seem to be a bit of a renaissance in it right now, despite the web, maybe because of it. And I'm just wondering what you guys think.
Anyone?
Well, I think it's a super exciting time for long form, actually. There's a lot of really innovative projects. There's Atavist, who does beautiful things. California Sunday Magazine is doing long form now. And the piece that we did, us with The Guardian, is, it was interesting how The Guardian did it in a sort of a serial format where they did one story a week. This is becoming kind of popular, this whole serial sort of way of telling a longer story.
Return to the 19th century.
Yeah, yeah, I always say long form is for people who don't like to read books, so it's actually,
Well, I think what's counterintuitive is that many websites are getting more and more traffic on their mobile devices.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, will long form continue to play on mobile, or will that become another obstacle for it?
May, how do you think about that? You're the new tech person here.
Well, it is exciting. I think that on the web we can show people who would normally just be in the written word, and that there are these opportunities to really get a full picture sense of the story. And I don't think that mobile's gonna kill long form at all. I know I read a lot of long form on my phone on the subway.
Okay, well, thanks. Martin Evans.
Thank you. Well, actually, I just had a conversation with our web people today, and she kind of was like, well, 400 words or,
Well, clearly Newsday has not caught the wind
we're
yet.
not sure yet.
Yeah.
We're not sure yet.
Maybe not on the Apple Watch.
I'm always told there's a wall between the editorial board and journalists, and I always ignore the wall and walk right in. Today I walked in to talk about the smack or the woman who smacked her kid in Baltimore, and it immediately went on to kind of went viral in the news media, and I went, I kind of walked in to talk to one of the editorial board folks in terms of their reaction to it, but also mine, and I thought that, and I brought in context of, is this being portrayed in the news with any sensitivity, or is it just sort of reported as woman doing good by smacking her kid? And I walked in and said, well, there's a legacy of violence that pervades black communities. It may have roots in slavery and Jim Crow, and in parents trying to protect their kids from this, from outside violence by kind of preemptive violence. And I did not think that the news coverage had that kind of nuance. I'm just wondering if there's any opinions. You from Baltimore, I wrote for the Sun.
No, good question.
Oh, wow.
Any thoughts?
But yeah, I wondered if that was just a plastic kind of coverage. I thought it was insulting.
Well, and let me actually take Martin Evans' important question and stretch it just a little bit. All of you dealt with issues in which there would be important cultural biases, perceptions, and misperceptions of some of the populations that you're reporting on. To what, not only in terms of this little bit from Baltimore that we're seeing now, but to what extent, as you did your work, did those concerns filter in as you thought about how to portray issues? Anyone? Melissa, you're nodding.
Yeah. Well, I'm always trying to get past the soundbite. I mean, writing about immigration, writing about illegal immigration, people are very polarized. They have assumptions. So my challenge is always showing the humanity of people on a human level so that people can get past their sort of, sudden, feeling about it. So yeah, I like to show the complexity of their humanity, and so that people can sort of get past that sort of bias that they might have about undocumented people.
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, I think it's all about showing the nuances. Just like when I talked about the little kids who, act out, you also talk about but they run to their teacher and they want to sit in her lap and read a book. They want to play tea. So I think it's just all about showing the nuances and just not portraying people as one-dimensional, but portraying people as being multi-dimensional. And I thought what you were talking about, I thought it was interesting how that played out. When I saw it, I just saw a mom who saw her son, got scared of what was going to happen to him, and just, reacted how she first thought. I don't think she thought about TV cameras being there. She just reacted. This is my son. What is he doing? I don't want him in trouble. But I do think in some of the short instances, like maybe short TV pieces, you can't show the nuance. So then you don't get the full story. You don't get how that can be portrayed. But I personally didn't see it as, her beating her kid. I just saw it, a passionate mom scared of what was going to happen to her kid. But I read all the commentary in the editorial about the slavery.
And let me just say, this raises an important issue, which maybe we can continue afterward. We're supposed to stop now, but we're not gonna, because so many of you have decided you now want to ask questions. We'll go for another 10 or 15 minutes, but I would ask everyone to keep your questions focused and concise so that we can, in fact, finish this in 10 minutes or so, and hoping that Ron can stick around and keep shooting it until then.
It's just striking to me that all these winning projects are projects. None of them were stories. None of them were a single story. And maybe, Glenn, yours is kind of the ultimate in taking some endemic issue and building like a really very large, ambitious project out of it. And I'm wondering if you or anybody can just talk about how you saw the project within the story and how you mapped it out. If you can think back to the origins.
Yeah, I think we got together and we started looking at all the components of domestic violence, and to try to do that in one giant story just seemed like an enormous amount to take on with one story, and that it split into cultural elements, economic, political, legal, and there's just so many different components that it just really needed that extra air to explore. And you were saying earlier the sort of the difficulty in tackling some of these these nuanced issues. I mean, religion and the churches and some of the patriarchal elements of South Carolina society, sort of the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about, and we wanted to talk about it and bring it to light, but not in a way that was very to take the Bible Belt and make a caricature of it. You wanted to explore, because a lot of the people that were contributing to the problem were very well-meaning folks in their own way, but going about it the wrong way and counseling women to stay in dangerous relationships and perpetuating stuff. So I think, to get back to your original thing, it just really made sense to explore this in a multi-part way.
Let's do this. Let's have two people ask a question. Ask a question, then you ask a question, then we'll try to deal with them two at a time as a way of
Hi, my name is Millie. I'm actually one of the photo editors at the Columbia Spectator, and dealing with photography and text and the written word and film, as all of your projects have done. I'm just wondering what kind of guidance you can give to photographers or to writers who aren't used to working across media, and just how you negotiate doing that with a team of people as opposed to a writer-photographer doing it on their own.
Okay, good. Duly noted.
Hi, my name is Denise. I would like to know how much time each of you spent on the story from the very beginning that you decided to work on it until the end, and where you work on it full-time or part-time.
Let's go story by story on that, and then we'll circle back to your very good question about working as a team on multimedia. So time, Dave, besides 35 years is not an acceptable answer.
I think it was 3 months from when I really started doing nothing else but working on the moral injury project until 5? That's why I have an editor, folks.
Melissa, May?
Oh, God, have been thinking about the story since I think 2007 when I worked in the legislature and the ranchers brought in photos of bodies to the senator that I was working for. So I had been thinking about this story for years, and I had to go out and get the funding, which I got through the investigative fund, and then we had this partnership with the Guardian, and suddenly it became all possible. So I'd say like about seven months, more or less, altogether.
Yeah, and I came in a little bit later, so I spent about 9 days in the field and then worked on this project and some other things for about 2 or 3 months editing.
Andrea?
So a year, except the first 6 months I was still covering my beat, so it was like maybe 2 days in the project and the other 3 days covering my beat.
But it was a year-long arc.
Yeah, but it was,
really.
yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe 3.
What, 11 months, 10 months?
Mhm.
But with periods of getting yanked around to do other things.
So how about this question of writing visual multimedia as teams? What advice do you have for our colleague here?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really helpful to collaborate with Melissa, and she really helped set out who the characters were. And then I often went out into the fields alone with them and would be talking with Melissa just to make sure that we were telling the same story. Sometimes I actually told a different side of the story. Like I met different ranchers that she was covering, so we could actually show more in the videos and give a different part of the story visually instead of just doing verbatim written and video.
One thing that we've started doing, I think traditionally you'd have the reporter go out and gather the information maybe with a photographer and then come back and then start talking to designers and other people. What we've started doing in the last year or so is really getting all those people in at the very beginning when you get the genesis of the idea, and then you get the creative elements. You get all these different perspectives coming out at the very outset, and the buy-in and the understanding of the project, and I think it really kind of grows out from there and takes a whole bunch of different neat directions.
Cool. All right, looks like there are 3 more questions. So let's, unless there, is that a 4th? Okay, so let's get 2 and then 2. So Thomas and Steve.
Oh, yes, congratulations to each of you all. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm a student here.
And Thomas Brennan is also a past DART Award honoree. First person ever to get it before being a student.
It's your show, though, but thank you. So I know whenever you start reporting, you're always going to find hiccups. I'm just wondering, obviously you didn't make too many mistakes because you're all sitting here, but I'm sure there's stuff that you all learned from as you were going through this process. So if you had any advice for journalists who were going out to do projects of this magnitude, what would your biggest takeaway be from your experience?
Good. Okay, so hiccups, that's hiccups and advice is question 1. Steve.
My difficulty is one that I actually want to ask you because I have things I want to say, but it's a short form. But my point, I want to say something and then ask you, which is I'm come from the psychological field, from the mental health field. And at the bottom of all you say are people who operate through their psychology and through the psychology that has evolved in human beings through all our experience over all our time, in whatever your form you put it in from war, from survival in immigration, from sexuality in interpersonal relationships, and I can't even read what I wrote, and from cultures. All of that is development from human experience and psychology over time. Is there some way, even just as a comment in the famous last paragraph, that you can put it in this larger context of the source of this is the products of development of human psychology, and that's where the real work to prevent the continuation of this comes from?
Okay, so let's start with Thomas's question first, which was, what hiccups did you encounter and what takeaways would you have for other folks? May, you're far end of the table.
Sure. So Melissa had mapped out which characters we wanted to follow, and one of the characters we couldn't find, and we thought she had in fact gone back to Guatemala, which was definitely going to be a problem if we needed to get her on video. But I ended up driving down to where she worked and looked in a guest log and saw that she had been there, and we weren't sure where she was. So just had to be persistent and ask around and find her, and we ended up finding her. And without telling that part of the story, it would have been hard to see the whole thing.
Thomas, I think the piece of advice I would give you is when you start out doing a project, you've got an idea of where you're going and why this would be a great story, but don't close off all your reporting options. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to talk to somebody or gone into a situation knowing this is what I'm going to get. It turns out to be completely different and usually better. So don't limit yourself, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, hiccups is a nice way of saying out-and-out mistakes, dead ends, or frustrations, Glenn, that turned into lessons learned.
I don't know if we hit any like super dead ends or anything. We had people that were tough to reach at different times. I think sort of not to be the opposite of what you just said, but David, but at the outset, I think it's really good to frame out an idea and what you hope to accomplish, and to file that away in maybe a little story memo or something like that. Because along the way, when you take on something like a big issue or a particular topic, you can just run off the road and go off in all sorts of different tangents and lose your way in something like that over time. It's helpful to pull that out along the way every so often and like, that's what I was planning to do. That regain your focus a little bit.
Andrea?
Yeah. That was the hardest thing for me, was focus. I had so much information. When I wrote the story the first time, it was all over the place. So learning to focus and kind of focusing as you go along and finding main points and main stories to write about helps a lot.
I think in the collaboration, communication is super important, because we were having a lot of conference calls with the Guardian back and forth about how we were going to do things, and then things really took off once May came out to Texas, because we could work more in closer quarters. So communication is super important in these collaborations, that you all are on the same page and deciding, what you're going to do.
And let's now go to this other question, which is a really interesting one about psychology. You do these stories and you gain some new insight into how people see themselves, how they interact with others. Do you see that as a place journalism can go, can do more of? How have you sort of integrated it in? Dave, this is really, you're explicitly on this terrain.
Yeah. I thought it was really important in talking about all this bad stuff that happens to leave people with a sense of hope that maybe people who have been morally injured can find some peace. And so I did spend a lot of time talking to psychiatrists and psychologists, mental health therapists, a lot of dead ends there, but I did learn a lot, and that turned out to be a big part of the project, which was, so what's the way forward here, or is all lost? All is not lost, there is a way forward. So,
Anyone else on this? Or maybe why you're drawn to stories that involve these kind of extremes of people's inner lives? Think about it, and we're going to circle back and get those. Let's get these last two questions.
Real quick, this is for everyone, though I did love your comment about the type of listening. Could you tell me again, what was that type of listening you said, sir?
validating.
Validated
Listening
listening.
with validation.
Listening with validation. I remember, I'm working on a story about male depression, and something that I'm running into that maybe, folks in this room, we tend to like tough stories. The folks who gravitate towards these amazing pieces hopefully care and want to learn more. How do you approach maybe those who might not be drawn to a domestic violence story, or to a veteran story, or to pieces like this that arguably we would say need to be told, need to be seen, heard, read, but maybe how do you get those in front of people? How would you approach that?
So I have a particular problem in trying to interpret the culture of the military to people who are not in the military, which is most people. So one thing that is critically important, or was so helpful for me, was to talk to people who weren't involved in my project, not my editor, not in the military. It was usually my wife, Beth, who's a journalist, and my biggest critic. And I could always tell when I'd be talking about how story is developing, and I could see in her eyes, I was sort of going off the rails. So it's very helpful to have someone who's, not involved in what you're doing to sort of bounce off your ideas of where you're going, because it is easy to get lost in the details and sort of forget where you're going.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think with domestic violence in particular, certainly that segment that thinks that's somebody else's problem, that's happening to somebody else. Oh, that's probably just the low-rent folks that's happening to. And I know Jen did a fantastic job of tracking down people from all walks of life, and we really tried to portray this as a problem that crosses cultural lines, socioeconomic status, different parts of the state, to make these people real to the folks who are reading, that this could be your neighbor, this could be your cousin this is happening to, so that draws it, you make the people human.
Actually, can I say one
Yeah,
thing? I did get an email from somebody after the stories ran, who said, maybe you could have written the stories in a way that white people in the suburbs would care. So, which I was surprised, but I didn't know how to take it. I was a little offended, but I also understand if it's the people being affected are reading it, then are the people going to help with change? But at the same time, why wouldn't you feel compassion for these people? And then how, is it my job to make people care, if they're not going to care about people suffering? So I don't know, it's interesting.
I suspect, based on the reactions of readers that I've heard of, and our judges and all sorts of other folks, that they did care, would be my guess.
Hi, I'm Samantha Miles. I'm doing a report right now on missing and murdered Indigenous women in the U.S., and the feature that I'm doing is on a woman from Arizona. And what I have found is that there is great distrust of the media, but also in her situation, her mother was killed by a serial murderer who killed 5 women before her. And one of the first reports that came out about it misidentified her mother as a prostitute. And so she had immense distrust of me to begin with. My mother is Mexican and from the Yaqui tribe in Mexico, and I also write for Indian Country Today. Even with that background, I had to really take time to hear her out with her hesitations and wanting to understand my intentions with the piece. So my question is, what is your advice for a journalist where, even though I have that background of identifying with Indigenous communities, how do you navigate the distrust with media?
Good question.
Yeah, that's something I face. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that I interview from Latin America if they've had an experience with the press, it's been very negative. There's a lot of sensationalism there, and a lot of, like what you explained, victimizing the victim, and so they have a lot of baggage with the media. And so then they come here, and I say, I'm from the media, and I'd like to interview you, and they don't want anything to do with you. And that's why I spend so much time with them, and I show them our publication, our magazine, and I explain to them, and I'm just really honest with them, and I listen to them and make them feel comfortable, and then I say, if you don't want to do this, then you don't have, by all means, you don't have to. But mostly it's just listening and being honest and explaining the system here and how the media works, and yeah, but I totally understand what you're going through.
One other comment on that, anyone?
I was just going to say, I've always found that people like to talk about themselves, and they almost can't help it. And so, being patient, being friendly, being open, being non-threatening, recognizing that they have probably legitimate reasons why they not comfortable talking to you, understanding that, again, listening in a validating way, all that stuff kind of helps. But I think in the end, people want to tell their stories. So
let me ask all of you a final question, final question, which is sort of a Dart Center question. These are all immensely challenging stories that took a long time on very dark and difficult terrain. What did you do to kind of take care of yourselves to make it, to lighten the load as you went along on this? How did you deal with the inherent challenges of immersion in such difficult stories?
I applied for an Ockberg fellowship.
And there are tips on our website, www.dartcenter.org. Yes.
Seriously, I did, because, because things were starting to get worse and worse on the border and in Mexico, and, I was a domestic reporter, and all of a sudden I was dealing with some very serious issues that you would deal with in war zones and so forth, and wasn't really equipped for it, and our organization's very small. There's just 12 of us in our entire publication, so we don't have those kinds of resources. So I actually did apply for the fellowship, and it was super helpful. And, it's, because I'm kind of an emotional person, so these things really impact me, So it's about finding balance, and a lot of my stories don't have happy endings, unfortunately.
Anyone else?
I got sad a lot of times writing these stories, and sometimes I walked away feeling like, this problem is never going to be solved. You need a social worker, one social worker for every kid in the school for this problem to be solved. But you just kind of keep some normalcy in your life, and then, remind yourself that you're writing about the issue, so hopefully it'll bring some attention to it. And then there are also people in the community, who are working to combat what was going on in the neighborhood. So that also gave, kind of a hopeful feel to the story.
So find colleagues, remember your mission, connect with people who are working on the issue. Anything else?
Yeah, I think just working in a team, working with other people and having that sounding board, meeting on a regular basis and sharing what you have encountered, it helps to get over that, so to know that other people are dealing with that, and to also have that shared renewal of the shared purpose of why you're doing this, and that this is an awful period you're going through, listening to a lot of this and internalizing it, but it's for a greater good.
I think also understanding or feeling out your boundaries is important, because when I was down there, I saw a fair amount of bodies, which I internalized more than I realized, and sort of had to work through that after I came back.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank our panelists, and congratulations to all the award winners.